Hello, welcome everyone. We are broadcasting from our BlendKit studio located here in Orlando, Florida. This is the third of our series of topical weekly seminar or webinar sessions for BlendKit 2017. And as we wrap up week 03's blended assessments of learning, just remember that week 4 starts today right after this webinar. So Bywin and I are delighted with the ongoing interactions that we're having with you, so thank you very much. With us today, as always, making sure that everything runs smoothly is our production manager, John Pizzo. Also joining us are our guest panelists, troublemaker Stephen Crawford and from Arizona State University, and Alex McDaniel from Metropolitan State University of Denver. And I only make that slight joke because as we were preparing, we found that they know each other very well, so it should be for an entertaining chat session today. I will introduce them more formally later, and first we have a couple logistics. Well, as you may know, there are now over 1,300 of us participating in BlendKit 2017, having rich interactions with one another and sharing our work as examples for each other in a variety of contexts through blogs, discussion groups, and submissions. I would also suggest that you use LinkedIn to make some connections with others, especially those in similar enterprises. And please use the opportunity to build your network. And don't forget, you can show off your badges there as well. All right, so let's take a look at what's been happening about this week's topic of designing assessments of learning for blended courses. First, we have a great picture of Chris Clark from Michigan, and we also have Nancy. Chris is donning his lovely slippers, showing us it's a little bit chilly up there. And Nancy, I'm not sure if it was cold outside or outside and inside, but both of you kind of have your summer or winter attire on, especially for us here down in sunny Central Florida. All right, we also have a great community working together. This is a community photo from Jenkins. I got a joke out of how he said a holistic touch therapy, because as you can see, he's got several touchscreen devices that he's working on. So that made me laugh when I saw that comment. So thank you for that post. We also have Inspired who is really showing off lots of ideas for how media can be developed in the courses. And we have Darlet, who's showing us or just reminding us that it's important to have some diverse assessment styles. So thank you for those posts. And last but not least, we had several of you busy doing some shout outs for us by tweeting. So thank you to Kate, Christy, Professor Lott, Beringia, and Leah for their awesome tweets this week. We really appreciate seeing all that interaction. So please make sure you continue to do that. We love seeing it. We love seeing the community take part. And again, it's really nice to see the interactions happening online. So thank you, and please continue. All right, well, as in past weeks, we review weekly some questions that we provide to you in a poll. So if you are viewing this recorded session, you do still have the opportunity to complete the poll. Just go ahead and use the link provided. But for now, we're just going to take a look at what we've had submitted so far today. All right, so let's start with any preferences you might have for types of learning assessments, and what types of assessments do you typically design? Well, I was really tickled and touched to see that the #1 response is, it depends. And that's so true. I mean, it does depend. What are your outcomes? What are you trying to encourage for interactions? People have been talking about, I'm not sure what I want to do face-to-face compared to what I want to do online. Several of you followed up with your concerns with cheating this week, so I absolutely can see where we get the it depends. But other than that, we had #2 coming in for our multiple choice and exams. So again, thank you for that feedback. All right, for poll question #2, as you're planning out learning assessments for your blended course, which of the listed assessment methods are you thinking of incorporating? And it asks to please select all that apply, and if you have thoughts on other ones listed, please select other. Well, #1, producing feedback at 75% was having them do some project work. 69% came in at online exams. And then we had face-to-face exams and papers kind of coming in a close third at around 30%. So again, thank you so much for incorporating your feedback into our polls. And we have just one more I want to go over with you, poll #3. So finally, as you contemplate learning assessments for your blended course, what issues are emerging for you and what concerns do you have? And like I just mentioned on that previous poll, our #1 concern is online cheating. Some people were concerned about the cognitive levels delivered and assessed, especially when creating and delivering multiple choice items. Some were concerned about designing activities and the time commitment it would take to grade those. Some had concerns with the time commitment of actually writing up instructions for maybe some elaborate activities. So again, we really thank you for putting in your feedback on this poll. It is still open for you if you are watching this recorded, so please still go ahead and make sure that you complete that form. So these are just some of the things that we wanted to address today as far as feedback. Please remember to, as we're going along today, up in your screen, you do have that right-hand side live chat. Please go ahead and use that if questions come along, but even more so, we do like you to chat amongst each other as you're going through. We're going to ask for the same protocol that Kelvin kind of did with us last week, and if you have a question specific to our panelists, please go ahead and make sure you start that with question, and that way we'll know to look at that and make sure that's addressed. All right, well, we're going to start with the questions submitted via the Google form last week as the basis for our moderated mini panel discussion. During the discussion, like I said, please use Q&A to post any questions you have or clarification you want from Stephen or Alex. We're going to follow last week's format and try to get the QA section at the end. If we do run out of time, we'll go ahead and post their responses in the discussion area, and we'll open the post up for continued discussion as well. All right, so please allow me to introduce to you Stephen Crawford from Arizona State University and Alex McDaniel from the Metropolitan State University of Denver. Stephen is the Associate Director for Academic Innovation at ASU College of Nursing and Innovation. He is also, in all his spare time, teaching at both ASU and Scottsdale Community College. And I think I mentioned last week, too, that I was going to be attending the Innovate conference coming up in April. And he has informed us that he will be the co-chair of the OLC Innovation Lab. So if you're out there, please try to stop by and see him. I believe Alex also mentioned that he will be there. So between Alex and Stephen and myself, hopefully you'll get a chance to talk to us if you're also attending. But to introduce Alex, Alex is a senior instructional designer at the Metropolitan State University of Denver, and kindly joining us this week for his second seminar with BlendKit. So we thank you both so much for joining us today and contributing to this online learning community. Let's go ahead and get started with some of our questions. I'll start with Stephen, and then I'll have Alex follow up with any additional feedback and comments. And then we'll switch the order for the next question. All right, so okay, Stephen, I'm going to start question 1 with you. How do you encourage academic honesty on assessments when you teach a blended course?
You know, that's a really good question. And one of the things that I like to start with is, you know, I know a lot of people are concerned about cheating in the online learning environment, and I've seen a large number of research that says that cheating is as prevalent or more prevalent in the face-to-face courses than it is in online. I think it depends on how we define cheating. For me, when you talk about academic honesty, anytime you're getting an unfair advantage, which includes group work, not doing your fair share, which includes asking for an extension that you don't deserve, like, you know, your grandmother died for the 3rd time, or your 12-year-old brother's getting married. You know, those are just basic problems that I think we have regardless of the modality of how we're teaching. So from that point of view, you know, it's the standard things that we would always do, you know, verify where possible. And I think for me, I like blended learning more because of the fact that I can have students go do things online and then bring those artifacts back into the classroom. So I focus in on creating an active learning environment so I can watch the groups interact if they're doing their group work in the classroom. I use more of a flipped model when doing a blended course. So they tend to do a lot of the pre-work outside of class, and then they come into class, they do in-class work, and now I kind of would circulate as a facilitator and guiding students through group processes. So now I can observe students doing their fair share. And so for me, I think the modality, if you use it correctly, minimizes some of the academic dishonesty issues that come up. But, you know, there are some things that are just hard to guard against. And so I think a good pedagogy can help with that.
Right, absolutely. Yep. All right, I'm going to open that up for Alex. Anything additional you'd like to add?
In the end, I think if you structure it so that if it's harder to cheat, if it's harder to be dishonest than to actually just go ahead and do the work and do the learning. That's always a good pedagogic strategy. And in this, there are several ways you can approach it. Of course, the new excuse is the digital dog ate my homework. And if you structure it right, if you structure enough low stakes, no stakes assessments where you get a good measure of a student moving towards their learning path, you can see where they're going to either jump or fall off their acquired knowledge curve, right? And if you structure it right, you'll be able to identify when a student makes that kind of a jump, and that's where you would want to have a learning intervention. Also, assessments that are cheat-proof are the ones that are really getting towards deeper knowledge. And I think this will come in one of the future questions that we'll talk about, is that when you have a lot of simple multiple choice questions and those kinds of assessments, it can become quite easy to cheat, and you're not hitting the deeper levels of assessment. So structuring the course so that there is constant low level, low stakes, no stakes assessment where you gain a good grounding of how the students are doing, and then structure your other assessments in more authentic ways where really the answer is, there's not a correct answer, but you're really looking at the process of how they achieve that answer, really guards against academic dishonesty.
Okay.
I want to add on to some of the things
Sure.
Alex said, because there's some really good points I want to tease out a little bit more. Those low stakes things, I can't, Alex mentioned those, and I can't underscore those enough. And I know that may come up in a later question here as well. But my biggest issue is getting students to do the pre-class work, and those low stakes assessments allows for that. And that allows for me to, as Alex was saying, to watch their learning. So that ticket in process is a great way to guarantee the students are walking into the room knowing what's going, making sure they have an understanding of what's happening, or at least if they don't, at least you can identify where their misunderstandings are. But the thing is, we have to be careful about the phrase cheat proof. I do want to mention that, because there are a number, in fact, if you dig through, Chronicle had, about 5 years ago, they talked to a ghostwriter, and the ghostwriting problem hasn't gone away. And these folks are smart enough to write original papers that will not show up in your plagiarism checkers. They will write drafts, and they will write your entire dissertation. There are interviews out there where they have admitted they have earned a number of doctorate degrees because they've put enough together that they can write through. So cheat proof is a word to be careful about, but it's really about really, again, as Alex was saying, just that framework and monitoring their progress. And I think, again, with the blended modality, you have that one-on-one contact. And so as long as that's not a student who's a ringer who's taking the class for somebody else, you're going to have that opportunity to kind of have that one-on-one conversation and tease out, is there something fishy going on behind the scenes?
Great. All right, Stephen and Alex, thank you so much for that feedback. I have a hard time working with instructors, just kind of letting them know that, the cheaters are going to cheat, and the ones that come up with late work excuses face-to-face are probably the ones that are going to continue that behavior online. And so you really do have to just kind of form some of those strategies that you said, make it as hard as possible to cheat, do some of those low-stake activities so you can get to know your students. So great strategies, and thank you. All right, let's go ahead and move on to number 2. Number 2 is a little long, but I think it gives us some good background as to why the question has been asked. So I'm going to go ahead and give Alex the opportunity to answer this one. I am struggling with defending to faculty the use of online quizzes and concerns about whether they are valid assessments of students' learning. How do we get faculty to buy into the concept of assessment for learning and quell the concerns about use of textbooks and other resources when taking these online quizzes? Alex.
I'm going to have to go with the standpoint of acknowledge the shortcomings and embrace them as powerful learning tools. The truth is, you will not effectively, and I'm going to jump on what Stephen was just saying, cheat-proof an online quiz. What you can do is acknowledge the domains of learning that you're hitting, the depth of learning. With online quizzes and exams, you're probably not going to strike the deeper levels of learning. That's the wrong assessment tool. It's being implemented, potentially incorrectly. But what you can do is those low stakes, no stakes kinds of things. And if you structure your assessment correctly and you say, hey, look, Students will use their textbook, but don't you want them to read the textbook? Isn't that one of the biggest complaints that we have as educators is you're not referencing my materials, you're not hitting the learning that I'm putting out. If you do these low stakes online assessments in a solid way, you can encourage students to learn and to self-check. But as far as getting to deeper levels of assessment, that's really not what these are designed for. Remember, these are machines, and we can set up these online assessments in such a way as to leverage their ability to do the monotonous, to go over and over and over. If we set up a large enough pool for online assessments, that's where we can really rock and roll with them. But we're not going to get to the deeper level of learning. We're not going to get to any kind of information synthesis. So being appropriate and very intentional with the tools that we have and making sure we really align the assessment that we have to the level of learning objective, that's critical in this, and acknowledging that, hey, that you do have this autonomy to look up resources and build that into that online assessment. That's where I would approach that from.
All right, great. Thank you, Alex. Stephen?
I mean, Alex has nailed that one. I mean, there's not much more to say. I mean, and I think that's really important. I think a lot of times we think about quizzes or pop quizzes. You have to use no resources. No, that's not where you're at this phase of learning. So I'm going to take another point of view on how I value these quizzes, and that is from the instructor standpoint, it's a great way to know that the students are doing the pre-course or the pre-class materials and activities, so that when I go to start in class, I can look up the stats and I can go, okay, I have an assessment that had 7 questions on it, and I saw that half the class missed one. I now know that when that class starts, I don't have to ask, what did you not understand? Or what are your muddiest points? I can now come in and go, okay, I see where you had some problems here. Let's talk about this. And I immediately change my in-class of what happens from online to face-to-face. It immediately impacts and shows, okay, I see where you've had an issue. Let's have a conversation. What was the problem around here? What were your misunderstandings? How can we solve your understanding of this? And that's all it is understanding. It's not anything deep. Because if you don't have that understanding, then you're not going to be able to go any deeper than that. The other thing I also would talk about is the issue of the students. The students not valuing the online quizzes. They will salad bar course. They know how very easily. They know which points will get them their A or their B or just pass with a C, whatever they want, and they'll salad bar those quizzes. So I'm more concerned about that problem than I am with faculty, really. I mean, though it is a substantial issue to be concerned about. And so from the point of view of the students, you know, I think making that connection from online quiz back into the face-to-face discussion increases the value for the students and hopefully increases the value for the faculty at the same time, and that will increase your blend even better.
Absolutely. I don't even have much to input or feedback on that because those are 2 great answers. So for time, we'll move on to question 3. So again, we can get more feedback from you. Stephen, I'm going to start with you on this one. So I am working on designing a blended learning program for the purpose of enhancing positive learning environments. My question is it procedural to make assessment of its effectiveness in improving learning environments part of the assessment of the module learning outcomes? All right, Stephen.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out what they're at. Trying to get a little bit more of what they're asking.
Okay.
Do I understand this? Are they asking, is it good process to incorporate assessment of the instruction and assessment of the learning as a part of the process? Is that how I understand this?
That's how I took it as well, that it's kind of asking for feedback besides just assessing the students themselves.
Let's see. I mean, you know, yeah, I'm trying to get a good grasp of that question. You know, when I look at it, and see, one of the things I also work with is academic assessment planning and course evals, as well as instructional design. So when I see the word assessment, I have about 15 definitions going through my brain.
Right.
And so, you know, I think, you know, when you think about the assessment of student learning and you think about the assessment of blended learning itself, and I'm going to go that route first. We have seen evidence in course evals where students have performed better and had and better being defined by their grades in a blended learning course. But we've also seen the course evals and the student push back the first semester or two it's offered, because a lot of times they hate it because you're asking them to do things that the previous cohort didn't do, and they've talked to their friends. They know how that class used to be taught, and they want it back to what it used to be.
Right.
Also, they're not, a lot of times students, and I have a K-12, somebody who's a former K-12 teacher on my team, and she talks about how active learning and now even blended is being used in the K-12 system. Some of our students just aren't used to taking responsibility of their learning as much as we'd like them to be. So, but we have noticed that once you kind of get past that second semester, the course evals go up, and they go up, and they don't just return to where they were. They actually go beyond it. And so yeah, from that point of view, I think it is important to consider the assessment of the learning effectiveness, both from the student performance standpoint as well as improving the blend. I think especially if you're just starting out, having not just the students, but having a peer or an instructional designer talk and see where you can better integrate and smooth the edges.
Right. Alex, any additional?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I look at this, I approach this as a similar way as Steve and I have multiple, definitions of assessment and how we would do that. I think it would be simply a loss of an opportunity for feedback, and feedback should go both ways. For you ever to say, no, I would not make a part of my process to evaluate the efficacy of my process. You always want that. So it's good procedure to build in two-way communication, two-way feedback. But the purpose is very different here. And I think that's where you would want to make the distinction, where you are looking for assessments of learning and feedback on the part of the learner. That's a very different process, and it would need to be distinct and removed from the efficacy of how you're doing all of this. And that can be done in multiple different ways. That can be done in surveys. That can be done in actually looking at the effectiveness. So this is something Stephen touched on earlier, is looking at your assessment instruments, those entry ticket items, those low stake items where it's more formative. That tells you about the student learning and about the instruction. Am I asking poor questions and that's why they're not able to demonstrate the learning? Or am I offering maybe not as solid of instruction? Is there something that I need to change? Is it a pace issue? And so having that automated feedback in the form of looking at the assessments and looking at those formative style learning opportunities, and gauging that, as well as building in some mechanism for feedback from the learner to the instructor and help to inform that process. And something that I always do after I teach or after I'm working with others is an after action review. You always got to come back and say, okay, what worked, what didn't work, what's anecdotal, what's solid, and how do we move forward from there? So that should always be a part of any process, regardless of what we're doing in instruction. I do want to circle back to question number one real fast. There's something that I do inside of my own courses, and that is to discourage academic dishonesty. One thing that I always do before every assessment activity is remind the learners of their agreement to the academic integrity pledge at our institution. Study after study does show that simply reminding them or having them acknowledge, and I just have them do a little check mark in the online version I talk about in my classroom, is, hey, don't forget, we all said we're going to do our own work. Does this do anything physically? No, but study after study does show that it improves and increases academic integrity.
Yeah, Alex, didn't Daniel Pink, I think it was Daniel Pink who did that original study? Yeah, that's a great one because they used the MIT Honor Pledge, which, by the way, there isn't one, but the students bought into it.
Right. And he said, oh, don't forget. And it was pretty dramatic. I forgot what the actual numbers were, but it was enough that I said, that's going to be a part of every course that I teach and every course that I work on.
Yeah, we use it here frequently as well. All right. Well, for time purposes, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up on this question. So thank you both, Alex and Stephen. You've given just amazing, wonderful experience feedback for all 3 questions. We did have a couple more questions that got submitted today, but just for time purposes, we're not going to be able to get to those. So I will follow up and send those both to you, Alex and Stephen, if you wouldn't mind addressing those, and then we'll go ahead and post the questions and the answers online in the discussion area, just because you've given such great answers and feedback, and these 2 questions were really good too, so I'd like to be able to follow up with those. If that's okay with you.
Oh, that's fine.
Wonderful. Sure. I appreciate that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and I am going to turn it over to Wynn. And I don't believe we have time for questions. So we will, any that were posted, we'll try to get to those in the discussion post as well. All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sue. That closes out today's guest panel. And we really have some good comments and questions coming in the chat area. So Sue and I will compile and forward those to Alex and Stephen. So we will post their responses in the discussion area. Okay, so as we wrap up today's webinar, I want to touch base on some housekeeping items. Remember, this webinar ends week 3 and is followed by the week 4 announcement kicking off our next week's activities. So first, if you haven't yet completed the week 1, 2, or 3 feedback form, please take time to complete it. The week 3 feedback form is available at the end of module 3 in Canvas. Also, you may contact us directly in Canvas. We do pay attention to our feedback to ensure that we continue to meet the needs of all our participants. If you are just joining us in BlendKit 2017 course, welcome. Please submit your weekly activities as you complete them, and we will grade them and provide feedback as soon as possible. Remember, these are suggested completion dates set up in the course to keep you on track. So you will have until April the 10th, 2017 to submit artifacts and activities for our grading and feedback. So let's take a look at some of the week 3 feedback. And so many participants, you find the DIY assignments useful, but there were some confusions about the DIY assignments as well. So the DIY activity last week was for you to submit a syllabus draft with key course overview components, including the schedule and protocols. So we also asked that you begin thinking about one module you will develop to complete the BlendKit 2017 badging requirement and outline that module using the module interaction week worksheet. Next week, we asked that you submit 1 to 3 files. This depends on what is applicable to your course and module development for clear assessment instructions. If you will use assignments to assess your students' successful understanding of the objectives, then you will need to submit a draft of the assignment and the instructions for completion. If you plan to use exams or quizzes for assessing learning, then please submit a draft of this activity, including instruction for students to complete. And there is a resource file for you to review in the assignment area. Also, some of you use the syllabus to outline expectations or activities, instructions, and grading protocols. If this is the case, then look at those files, modify and submit those artifacts for us to review and provide feedback. And also some of you are have K-12 submissions where you plan to use progress charts or visuals for students to determine their progress and success. Please submit those too and include visuals if possible. So you do not need to submit all these examples for credit, but you may if applicable and if you want feedback. We will be looking to review at least one of them on your thoughts and expectations on assessment, and we'll mark your grade as soon as you submit. Some requests from us we have, and that's on your submissions. So please name your file in a similar convention as what is listed in the assignment area. If you plan to submit an assignment, an exam, or a syllabus, please label the file with that title. It makes much easier for us to locate the requested artifacts and review for your completion grade and also provide feedback. So look into our next week's activity. Later today, you'll be receiving an email message from us with some guidance on getting the most out of week 4. In next week's webinar on blended content and assignments, we will be joined by Dr. Daniel Fotosek from Oregon State University and Dr. Debbie Hosfong from the University of Central Florida. I hope you will join us for that session. So lastly, don't forget about the UCF EDUCAUSE certificate. If you have been submitting the DIY projects each week, you are a strong candidate for the UCF EDUCAUSE certificate. So for specifics on the portfolio, please go to the module inside Canvas. And the continuing education credit, CEU, will be offered again this year. If CEUs are valued by your employer or industry, you might want to consider this option. Again, detailed instruction is inside the module area, and you can read the criteria for evaluating the portfolio in the rubric inside the portfolio assignments. Again, and thanks very much for your participation in today's session. Thank you again to our guests, Alex and Stephen, and as always, John Pizzo for the production support. If Sue and I can help in any way as you progress through the course, please contact us in Canvas. We'll be happy to help. Have a great week.